Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Lisanne Sison. Lisanne is the Managing Director at ERM and ESG at Gallagher, a Fortune 500 global insurance brokerage, risk management, and consulting services firm. She has many years of experience in the enterprise risk management, and she will provide us some great insights, I hope, on the topic of aligning ESG with strategy to maintain relevance and momentum, with some actionable tips. So, Lisanne, thank you for joining us today for our Risk Management Show podcast interview.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Lisanne, could you please tell us a short story about your career path, yourself, what brought you to where you are right now?
Yeah, sure. So I actually started my career in the Big Four accounting firms. I started out with kind of in the internal audit space, regulatory compliance, process improvement, internal controls, activity-based costing, and really enjoyed that work. I enjoyed working. I mostly worked with public entities, hospitals, nonprofits, higher education institutions, municipalities, and state and local governments. But in that role, I got the opportunity to do an enterprise risk management project for a large university system, and just got the bug, thinking about how you can align risk with strategy and how it's more than just insurable risk, that it's strategic risk, that it's operational risk, that it's reputational risk, and being able to help organizations of all kinds really chart a path of how they could balance risk and strategy and opportunity to support their goals was really exciting. So I got the opportunity to do that full time about 15 years ago and haven't looked back since. Adding the ESG element has been relatively new over the last maybe 2 years, but really using our ERM approach of aligning strategy and risk to support goals and initiatives. And we really view ESG as an emerging risk area for organizations. So how do you adapt to that using those same ERM brain cells?
Fantastic. So can I, of course, many people know, but maybe you can explain us what does ESG stand for and why has it become such a hot topic in recent years?
ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And I think that it's become a hot topic for a couple of different reasons. Number one, in my ERM work, I find that a lot of risk registers, their top risks are things like climate change, employee retention, diversity, equity, and inclusion, compliance with evolving regulatory landscape. And these are all elements or key features within ESG. So I think that's one element that makes it very prominent. The other part that I think makes it a hot topic is that there's a lot of uncertainty about what is actually included within ESG. It casts a very broad umbrella. And so it means different things to different people, and different people respond to uncertainty differently. Some are like, yeah, let's go. And others are, let's wait, see, let's measure, let's see how it goes. And so there's tension on both sides of the issue. And anytime there's that tension, it creates discussion. And I think it's a valid discussion.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps can you explain as how ESG can be aligned with the company's overall business strategy? Because we see a lot of kind of greenwashing or some kind of as if a project that people just do to put some to explore some money. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, again, using our enterprise risk management approach, we really view a lot of the critical risks that come up from an ESG perspective as critical to the achievement of an organization's long-term strategy. And I think one of the greatest benefits of ESG is it kind of shifts the focus a little bit from short-term financial only performance to long-term operational performance and financial sustainability. And the way to do that is to make sure that your ESG programs and initiatives are really aligned with your strategic goals and priorities. So let's say, for example, your organization wants to expand into different geographies, or be able to provide new products and services, or grow in the green technology and carbon neutral areas. what are the threats that would prevent your success in that, and what are the opportunities that you can really leverage to support those goals. And then your ESG initiatives and actions become integrated with where you want to go as a company. And that helps in a couple different ways. So it's just really critical to help your ESG program take root and really expand, and really ESG can really help you get to where you want to go from that perspective.
Mhm. And so can you perhaps dive in a little bit, and what are some of the benefits that companies can derive from integrated ESG and into their strategy? Maybe more kind of details, maybe some examples without naming names, but just to see how it works in real time.
Absolutely. I think that there's two key benefits around ESG, and one of them clearly is it benefits your ESG programs and initiatives, right? So this alignment with strategy helps make sure that ESG is not just something on the side. It's not a check the box activity. It's not purely a marketing effort or activity. It's really something that's critical to helping to make sure that not only the organization is heading in a direction that supports its long-term viability and sustainability, but also brings its employees along for that ride. We're finding that ESG is a really critical recruiting tool for organizations, because people want to work for organizations that share their values. And ESG programs are a great way to help organizations communicate what those values are and compete in that very competitive space for the best talent. So I think that that's one area. It definitely helps the ESG programs, and it helps the organization as a whole. Secondly, it helps with strategy, because what it does is I find that sometimes when organizations set strategy, it doesn't always think about the current environment in real time. It can be very aspirational. It can be very long-term focused. By adding an ESG layer into your strategy, it really helps to reconcile and connect that strategy to what's happening now, whether it's from an environmental or a climate perspective, whether it's from a supply chain perspective, whether it's from a reputational and engagement perspective. Making sure that ESG is a component of the decision-making process related to strategy really helps make sure that the organization is addressing those critical issues as part of its strategy. So you don't get these blind spots that are just focused on bottom line, that are just focused on growth, that it really provides a more comprehensive way to advise the strategy.
Mm. So how can we perhaps ensure that companies on a senior level, that their ESG initiatives are authentic and aligned with their values, rather than just being a PR exercise? Is it something they have to probably approach on senior level, or what is your opinion on this?
Absolutely. Support for ESG really needs to come at the top level of the organization. It needs to be a clear imperative for the organization to really adopt it, because there are some things about ESG that can be a little bit uncomfortable. It comes with a higher level of scrutiny. It comes with a higher level of reputational exposure. But at the same time, values, we have to keep in mind that organizational values in some cases are also aspirational. They're not always the tried and true core of the organization. They drive it, but sometimes some values are core. They're part of how organizations always operate, and some of them are values that they aspire to, that they recognize that there's some growth opportunity to move towards. And I think that ESG is very similar, that you want to make sure that you are latching on to the things that the company or the organization has already established as paramount. They've already set their mission. They've already established their strategy. They've already defined these values that are core to who they are. You can actually use ESG to fortify and exemplify how you live your values on a day-to-day basis. So if you have a value that is be inclusive, ESG gives you very specific guidance related to how can you be more inclusive? Can you be more inclusive in hiring, in your internship programs, in your client outreach, in your marketing? How does that impact the day-to-day business? And it helps make that more effective. And so one of the things that a lot of organizations are fearful of is that they have really doubled down on corporate social responsibility being the end all be all of ESG. You know, we have these big corporate sponsorships, we volunteer, our employees volunteer and engage, and ESG makes them feel like, well, this isn't enough, but it really is enough. And I think that it really just makes sure that it demonstrates that the track is to be able to capture and demonstrate how your organization lives your values. And I think that ESG actually just provides a great opportunity to be able to do that effectively.
Mm-hmm. So if we drill down a little bit to implementation, what are some of the challenges that company face when it comes to implementing these initiatives, and how can they overcome these challenges?
Every organization is different. They're going to have a different culture. They're going to be in a different industry. They're going to have different motivation for engaging in ESG. And so I think it's first important to think about what ESG means to your specific organization, to your culture, and to your industry, and then figuring out what's important. I think one of the biggest challenges for organizations is getting them aligned on what ESG means to them and what their priorities are going to be. And that takes some time. Right? So I read this, I saw this LinkedIn post, it was a while back, about growth. And I really think that ESG is a growth opportunity. And her idea was that you have to have a third of it in your comfort zone. You have to have a third of it that's a little bit of a stretch. And you have to have a third that's sheer white knuckle terror. And that's where you get growth from. For ESG, we probably want to avoid the white knuckled terror part. But if we can get close to 50-50, if half of it's in our comfort zone and half of it is a little bit of a stretch, I think that that can really help organizations get aligned. One of the second challenges that I think, and I'm not going to go through too many of these, but one of them is really this idea that we need to get comfortable with being a little bit uncomfortable. That comfort zones are really only expanded through periods of discomfort. And yes, ESG does bring an increased level of scrutiny. It does create some risk on its own. But if we don't leverage it to be able to support innovation, to support moving forward, to support connecting new ideas, we could actually be missing out on a lot of opportunities. It can have a detrimental effect on our operational performance. And so this idea of reporting metrics that might not be, that might not put us at the top of the class, that takes a certain muscle within an organization to be able to do that. And so becoming more comfortable and mindful about realizing that we're not at the end of the marathon yet, that we still got a little ways to go, but having incremental goals and a plan to get there is much better to be in that position than to kind of refrain and avoid that type of oversight. And really the last challenge that I want to talk about is there's this feeling that we have to eat the entire elephant at once, right? We need to solve all of the problems at the same time, but organizations have finite time, they have finite resources, they have finite bandwidth. And so we really need to prioritize from a materiality standpoint. What are the most important ESG issues to face? What are the things that are important to our organization, our growth, and what's our plan to be able to get there? And again, kind of split that between what are the areas of comfort and how can we grow and build on those areas of strength, and where are the areas that we have an opportunity to improve and build a plan around those.
Fantastic. So what are the right measures of this impact of ESG initiatives, and what metrics are important for organizations?
There's a lot of good resources out there, especially from stock exchanges and platforms around what types of metrics they expect to see for their listed companies. I know that NASDAQ has some great resources on their website for organizations. I know that's US specific, but I'm sure that other stock exchanges have similar resources and guides. But the idea is that we need to make sure that we're spreading our metrics across all elements of E, S, and G. I find that A lot of focus is much more on the climate piece of driving down greenhouse gas emissions, and that's absolutely important. So you're definitely going to have metrics around how you're reducing your carbon footprint, how you're addressing your direct supply chain and waste, where you're getting your energy consumption from. Those are typical metrics that you would have on the E bucket. On the S bucket, the big drivers for that are going to be around diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're going to be around employee safety. They're going to be around your community engagement and volunteerism and philanthropy. And so those are great metrics to be able to include in the S. And on the G, we want to look at things like equitable compensation. We want to look at things like how we hold our board accountable. We want to look at how we hold our executives accountable to goals, not only ESG goals, but financial performance goals, and make sure that we have those internal control structures in place to be able to balance out everything. So it's there's a plethora of metrics out there. So the idea is make sure that you take your goals, that you put your initiatives, and then you measure how you measure progress against those goals. And that's kind of how you can filter down to the metrics that matter to you.
Interesting. I have a difficulty to understand. For example, if I'm a coal mining company heavy on these emissions, and I want to buy carbon, what is it, points or something?
Carbon offset.
Yeah, so I'm going to this marketplace and I buy this points, and probably somebody like Tesla sells it. So in the end, I will be good for ESG, right? Because I bought it. But in fact, I can do this as much as I want.
Yeah, there's two approaches to ESG, right? So there's the carbon neutral approach, where you want everything within your operations to actively reduce as much carbon as possible. I'm oversimplifying here, but in general, if you have a carbon neutral approach, is you're looking to take all of your activities and reduce the carbon impact as much as possible. Net zero really is you can just offset your costs, by taking all the profits that you make on oil or coal or other things and be able to just offset that with others. Both of those are strategies that exist. The challenge is, I think, that various stakeholders, especially shareholders, the public, they are going to be the ones that really motivate how organizations address their environmental impact and their carbon impact. So I think that it's actually great that there's a lot of these different options out there. I think the role of those that are really pushing within the the green energy space is to make it attractive for organizations to convert. There's got to be some type of incentive. It can't all just be stick. And so for those coal companies, there has to be some way to be able to incentivize them to transition, because eventually those carbon offsets are going to be financially prohibitive, and there's going to be a line at which that's not going to be sufficient to offset their impact, and they're going to have to do something about it. And so it's really just a time and appetite thing. I think that it's good that there's multiple options. Each organization, in absence of regulation, really needs to choose their own path. But I think that the incentive is really on how can we minimize using our changes to processes and then just offset the balance. I think that's a better approach.
Yeah, interesting. So how important is a stakeholder engagement in the ESG process, and how can companies ensure that they are effectively communicating their ESG initiatives to all relevant stakeholders?
There's a lot of different stakeholders, and I don't think that this is a muscle that organizations work out all the time. A lot of times they're very focused on shareholders and they're very focused on customers, and then somewhat focused on employees, but members of the community and others that might have a more indirect impact from their operations, they don't always put that hat on and think about their operations and think about the motivations and think how that might impact their organization. So one of the first steps in building your ESG program is actually doing a stakeholder analysis and thinking about who your stakeholders are, both your internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders, and thinking about what are the things that drive them related to your ESG strategy. What are the features of ESG that your stakeholders are going to care about? Which of them do they feel is material to not only their interest, but your company as a whole or your organization as a whole? And how would you then communicate? Because everybody knows you can't make everybody happy at the same time. You know, a key feature of compromise is that everybody is disappointed, and that means that you compromised well, is that everybody's got a little bit of unhappiness. And stakeholder engagement with ESG has some of those features, that there are going to be aspects that some stakeholders will be very happy about, and there will be some that are very unhappy. The key is to know who those stakeholders are, to understand their motivations and interests in your ESG strategy and activities, and have a structured communication plan across various channels to be able to give them appropriate information at predictable intervals. Those are the things that I think would be really important. Making sure you know who your audiences are, making sure what their interests are, and making sure you have a channel and a cadence to update those stakeholders as appropriate.
All right. So with regard to regulation, what role do regulation play in shaping the ESG landscape, and how can companies stay up to date with changing all this every time changing regulations and expectations?
I'm going to break my response to that into two pieces, and I'm going to switch it a little bit. There is a plethora of ESG stuff out there. It's really difficult to be able to read everything that comes out. Different countries are doing different things, different companies are doing different things. There's thought leadership all over the place, and there's just a mountain of information, and it's really hard to prioritize. So my guidance for that would be to really try to pick specific entities that are relevant to your organization, your industry, and really filter down your guidance to those that are credible and are relevant to your particular industry. So if your industry is manufacturing, look for professional associations. If you're publicly traded, look at your stock exchange to make sure that you're adopting their guidance. And of course, look at your government regulatory, because trying to stay up on everything all at once is not, I haven't found it to be particularly feasible. It's just impossible to read everything coming out on ESG. So that's kind of the one piece, is to filter. In order to stay up to speed, filter your sources to credible sources that are relevant to your industry and your operations and your status as an organization, whether you're publicly traded, private, or et cetera, where you are globally, making sure that you're thinking about both those local and regional regulations. The second part of your question related to, what is the role of that regulators play? And I think there are two critical roles that regulators play with regards to ESG. And the first is that it helps motivate organizations to do something. That we all know that not everybody is going to voluntarily engage in ESG efforts, and so it will take some type of regulation or requirement or mandate to get them to move. So I think that that's one benefit of regulation, is it will motivate everybody to play a role in ESG. The second is that it supports improved standardization. I think that that's one of the challenges that we have, especially here in the US, is that we lack a little bit of standardization right now, and it's difficult to figure out what are the right metrics, what are the right pieces of data to collect, how can we gather all of that and put it together in a meaningful and consistent format and benchmark against our peers. But as the regulatory piece evolves, that will become much easier. And I think that that's a critical role that regulations play, is motivating folks to take action and providing consistency, guidelines to support consistency on how they execute on those plans and report on them.
Fantastic. So if we summarize it, for someone who is listening to this interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would that be?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that the best advice that I could give goes back to when you're building your ESG program or working to get started with ESG, think about dividing those efforts to half within your comfort zone and half that's a little bit of a stretch. So that's kind of one piece. The other piece is to make sure that you keep your ESG activities aligned and directly connected with your strategy and values. So it's not something that can be easily set aside, that you need to position ESG as a critical component and factor to supporting organizational success, not just ESG success. So those would be my two takeaways.
Fantastic. Okay, so, Lisanne, thank you. It was very. These were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot to ask you something and you want to add, please go ahead.
I don't have anything to add. I really enjoyed this opportunity to speak with you, and thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you. It was very useful, and I hope we can further discuss maybe in a few months another question, another topic with your company or somebody from your company, because we are always looking for good speakers about on risk management topics.
That sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely, thank you.